the reconfiguration of the world order after 2 years of the pandemic and over a year of war. Dear Professor, the floor is yours. It will be online presentation.
Yes, thank you. Bună dimineața. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Dear colleagues, I'm deeply honored to be together with you at this very important international conference. I'm very sorry that I'm not physically there, but I assure you that my heart is together with you. This time I chose to present this topic concerning the reconfiguration of the world order after 2 years of COVID pandemic and over a year of war. Nowadays we are assisting
Sorry, there are problems with the connection.
I'm sorry, I was disconnected.
Yeah, we saw.
I will continue immediately to upload my presentation. So, like I choose to present some ideas about the reconfiguration of the actual world economic order after 2 years of COVID pandemic and over 1 year.
I'm sorry, dear Professor, can you put your presentation in the extend form?
Can you see my can't you see my presentation?
We see, but it is not in extend form. Press F5.
I'm sorry, but already I gave it. Can you hear? Can you see now?
We see, but it is not an extend form.
Now? No.
Okay, continue, please.
It's okay?
It's okay.
So, pandemic and war. Why I chose these subjects? Because pandemic and war have been two important accelerating factors for the new world order. For having a proper landscape of the world transforming process, I'm going to the end of the Second World War very rapidly, when a new stage of globalization has arisen. This was based on post-war liberalization theory, and then two main trading systems had developed, namely North-South system and new intra-North system. This especially this new intra-North system followed to equalize lower income industrial countries that's in the process of catching up with higher income levels. This phase of globalization was based due to developing maritime transportation of different commodities and specialization between countries. The world trade increased then in that period, and in my opinion, several decades after the 50 years, continue to be very rapidly. Today, world trade volumes is 40 times the level recorded in the 50 years. World trade value have increased almost 400 times the 50s level. This dynamically growth of trade has been possible also through substantial tariffs reducing and like I said before, because of the very dynamic developing of transportation. Like we see now, we are seeing now on the screen, this post-war liberalization increase bulk of foreign direct investment, also reducing between country and within country gap in developed countries. It was a massive participation to global trade in opening up. And the size of market, like Adam Smith predicted in his book, the size of a market matters very much. A large group of developing countries broke into global market, and very important, the transnational corporations began to develop also very rapidly. And now I will. Liberal trade policy. The power of trade, specialization, transportation, tariffs reducing have contributed to a alert growth rate of production and trade. I prefer to call this stage of globalization as a dynamic one. We assist to the increasing power to trade for promoting economic convergence. We assist to increase specialization, to an efficient resource allocation according to comparative advantage, to a diffusion of international knowledge through trade, to increase domestic competition as a result of international competition. In this graph, we can see that world trade in goods as a percentage of world GDP increased after the end of the Second World War, especially after 1960s. Increased very dynamically, but we can see that the 8th decade it was, let's say, because of the raw materials and energy world crisis, we see a download trends, and also we can see on the 2008 when the financial crisis erupted in the international level. But
sorry, move your presentation.
Excuse me?
Move your presentation to the next slide.
To move on the next slide?
Yeah, because we see only the second slide.
It is something very strange because I move all the time. I don't understand what is happening. Can you see now? No.
No, we see only the second slide.
Very odd. I will give once again, okay?
Okay.
Now?
Okay.
It's
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We can see that in spite of these download periods, we notice that increase of world trade in goods ratio increased from 90% in 1960, like we could observe, to 42% nowadays. It is a huge increase in ratio of world trade of goods as a percentage of world GDP. So, what is happening now? Now we can see that a new stage of globalization has arose again. There are different opinions about the period when this new stage of globalization has arisen in the international, and it is felt by the main actors. The period differs if we follow the economic literature. But the world economic history has showed the evolution from a stage to another stage that is not a static process. This happens maybe in several years or even in 2 or 3 decades. In my opinion, the transition period started in the beginning of this millennium, when, let's say, before 2001, when it is this year when China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, 80% of countries had a larger volume of merchandise trade with the US than with China. And gradually, we saw that only 30% of countries traded more with the US than they did with China. This is a rapid and long-term high GDP and trade rate growth that determine a visible such shifting. The economic center to the Southeast Asian countries is based on reliable low-cost the main cause, and on another cause, important cause, is on the top of the Tennessee transnational companies rankings. Chinese companies gain important position. Another aspect is that gradual increasing volume of the transnational corporation compete to state in terms of wealth, in terms of profits. And another important thing is the fact that the rapid changes in technology needs raw materials, needs semiconductors, and also rare earths. So, what is happening with in the China? China announced and implemented a Made in China 2025 strategy. This encourage its economic expansion that is changing the international economic order. And very briefly, I like to say that China is striving for technological autarky because it knows that imports are its Achilles heel. The country currently buys more semiconductors for its digital industry nowadays than oils. China is following Sun Tzu art of war, avoid the main power and penetrate the open spaces. For example, that China follow this strategy is the fact that North America is only continent that is not included in China's One Belt, One Road initiative. So we are assisting now for, let's say, 2 decades, and maybe we'll assist in continuous another two decades or more, from passing from an unipolar to multipolar world, but in front of the transforming process, we see two big power, USA and China. We are in a long transition to a new globalization and a new economic order. And main facts during the transition is 2008 financial international crisis, COVID pandemic, and wars. I will say not war, I will say wars, because everybody are seeing nowadays what is happening in different points of the world. The transition began when the liberal order ended. Can we put finger on this? The key is the world's most important force for innovation. The world is changing to a new order, and I will give you, in my opinion, of course, some signs. First of all, an increasing competition for technology supremacy. We assist to a very rapidly revolution to digital transforming, to developing very dynamically towards IA, artificial intelligence. But like England in the past and US today, China has assumed that the exercise of global power entails control of the seas and sea lanes. For example, the South China Sea is a place where 70% of the world container traffic and 50% of the flows of hydrocarbons and liquefied natural gas transit. China controls the global rare value chain. Is included in its strategy for developing until 2025 a large investment, huge investment in artificial intelligence. Also, there are some transforming process, and we assist that in the fact that China overtook the US and the US European Union most important trading partners for goods. And also we assist also that China is trying to build and succeed to build a Chinese infrastructure from the border to Arabic Peninsula, for example. we see some different policy applied from USA and China. Is similar with, let's say, the stick and carrot strategy. We assist in the Trump era to the NAFTA renegotiation that allows USA the right to opt out if its partner would sign trade agreement with non-free market economies, for example, with China. The US wants to halt China's technological rise by different methods, let's say tightening restrictions on imports, limiting Chinese takeovers of high-tech companies, restricting visas for Chinese students studying in high-tech areas, and so on. On the Middle East, for example, we saw a wave of infrastructure investment from China, including large potential investment in Oman, in Abu Dhabi. What is happening in this very turmoil, world turmoil? What is happening in European Union? European Union is facing a tough balancing act. Europe's challenge lies in finding a strategic orientation in this new economic order, an order determined, of course, more by according to another fact, I will show to you another fact that is deeply connected with the policy of China that are trying to enlarge its influence. According to recent studies between 2010 and 2020, Asia contributed to global economic growth more than the European Union, but in front is China. US in change can offer to advance its political and security interests. For example, I will give an example. In the USA-ASEAN Summit in May 2022, the Biden administration pledged $150 million in support for infrastructure security and combating the pandemic. But China has committed 2021, in addition to the 53 projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. That we can see that China is preparing to give 10 times more in helping the countries in need, because of course he wants it is a policy of developing and assuring, let's say, a very a policy of investments and dominating around its territory. But this around territory is not so near from China. Like I said, it covers the territory from its border to the Arabic Peninsula. I would like to thanks for listening me, for being so patient, and excuse me for this interruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear professor, for your presentation. Your insights are very important and greatly enhance our understanding of the new trends in the process of globalization. The next report will be presented by Professor Anders Pazlov, a habilitated doctor from Stockholm School of Economics in Riga, Latvia. The title of the report is Economic Growth in Conditions of Globalization, a focus on EU transition and the Baltics. Dear Professor. Yes, 1 second.
Yeah. Oh, here we have it. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. And as the rector of the Academy of Economic Studies in Moldova mentioned, this is not only a time to share research findings, it's also a time to network and build so to say, fundaments for future research projects. So I'm twice as delighted being here to talk a bit about research, but also to be around for networking. And I will be together with my colleague, Kata Fredheim, we will be around for the coffee break. And please feel free to grab us because we are very interested in joint research projects, and we already identified demography. I listened to the circular economy presentation, very, very relevant for both Latvia and Moldova. So my topic is, so my challenge given by the organizers was to discuss globalization. From a very different view, we had a very good introduction to globalization, to the, call it real macro, the real world issues as such by the previous speaker. My perspective is very different, coming kind of from small countries. I'm Swedish, but working in Latvia and now in Moldova. We are all very small countries, so we cannot really affect what US, China, the EU are doing. So that is my approach. When I looked into the topic, it struck me that, which was also mentioned in the previous presentation, that we have experienced a change kind of from the very liberal world order, kind of in the 1990s with the integration of the former Soviet Union, the Comecon countries into the global economy. And then things have happened during the last 20 years. And when you look into globalization now, there is also quite a lot of talk on deglobalization. Talk about that we should not maybe offshore, we shouldn't go to Asia, maybe we should reshore, take it back to our country, or we should near shore, take it to neighboring countries. So then I thought maybe this is something where both Latvia and Moldova has something to contribute. So yeah, we heard, so there's not very much to say on this slide, that globalization really took off in late 60s and the 1970s, and it transformed. And I'm now old enough, so I remember Sweden prior to really globalization, that it really transformed the economy roughly between 1975 and 1990, that Sweden used to have big shipyards, textile industries, lot of kind of consumer goods produced in the country in 75, and in 1990, all of it was gone, and you bought clothing from Portugal, you bought clothing from Asia, the ships were now produced in South Korea and so forth. So globalization, of course, continuously transforms both markets and states, but it also puts a lot of restrictions on what states can do, that we are subject to the global forces, and as a policymaker, one has to really navigate in a different landscape. EU is very much, we talk about the kind of preparing for the internal market, joining the EU. That was a message, I guess it's a message here. It was definitely the message both in Sweden when we joined and in Latvia, preparing for the internal market. But being prepared for internal market to very much extent also means that we are prepared for the global market as such. Finally, just one remark on globalization, that in general, it has contributed to overall improvement of economic welfare. But again, like in economics, we have to think about kind of the overall improvement and at the micro level. So overall improvement doesn't necessarily mean that we are better off at the local level. But then what has changed if we go back something 20 years in time, and kind of we can kind of start from the kind of events being very close in time, that we have seen the COVID pandemic that challenged a lot the supply chains. It made us think, is it really a good deal to source everything to Asia? We have the war in Ukraine, and as previous speaker mentioned, we also have a number of other wars that has affected the way the global economy works. Those are kind of fairly distinct changes. Then we have, which I would say relates to what we discussed earlier, the circular economy. We have sustainability issues that are now much more important than 20 years ago. We have ethics. Is it kind of ethical to buy a t-shirt at €3 at a H&M store when it's produced under very, very poor conditions? Sustainability issue, environment, transportation. Should my t-shirt really traveled all the way from China to Europe, and is it worth the savings there? All this maybe could be summarized in the word geopolitics, that we have a very, very different geopolitical situation. And when I talk with business people, I talk with people who educate business people, there is an enormous interest nowadays in geopolitics. And that really shows that we are in a different world, where as a decision maker, you probably have to think in a much broader way than just cost minimization, selling at a low price, making a decent profit, not caring about sustainability and ethics. So what has happened, as I see it coming from economics, is that the risks they have always been there, but we probably didn't think about. Go back like 5 years to 2018. How many of us did think about the pandemic? How many of us did think about a war in Ukraine? It was such a low probability that it would happen. So we didn't care about it in our decision making. And people usually call it kind of low probability, have high impact events. And here the probabilities were so low, so we didn't care about them at all. What we now have seen is that decision makers, be it on the political side, be it on the business side, really start to think about these issues. They take a look at it when they make a decision where to source production and how to kind of look at the supply chain from a very, very different point of view. And my argument coming in a few seconds is this something that we as small countries strategically located within, hopefully soon, within the European Union for Moldova, that we can benefit from, and if there is something we can call deglobalization. So this reassessment of risks have led to, like what people do when there are risks. You start diversify. You do not put all the eggs in one basket. So maybe it's not good to have all of my input sourced from a certain country in Asia, let's say. Maybe I should diversify in terms of countries. That's first observation. Geographical proximity. Yeah, maybe it's better to have something, if you're in Sweden, produced in Latvia or maybe in Moldova, because it's closer. It's much closer than China, and if supply chains collapses, if it's from Latvia, you just send a ship across the Baltic Sea and you get it. So geographical location now becomes, I would say, much more of an issue. Then if we relate a bit to the softer values I mentioned, or softer items like ethics, like sustainability, maybe it's better. Maybe my end consumers are more happy if they hear that a t-shirt is produced in Moldova under decent working conditions, and it costs a few euros more than if it's produced in China or in Vietnam under conditions that cannot be justified given our values. So I would say the shared values, the shared culture, also becoming a much more important aspect when we talk about where to source and affect kind of our way of seeing globalization. Institutional framework, yes, we rather prefer to work in an environment where we have democracy, where we have stable rules, good rule of law, and that's where EU accession came in very handy for Latvia, in particular the process leading to EU, that in Latvia we had to revise the judicial system, we had to really think about the competitiveness of the country in a way that we hadn't done before EU talks, EU accession preparation. So then you're all researchers, you might ask, is there any empirical evidence for changes? Yes, there is. It seems like there is a trend that companies bring production closer to where they are located, some sort of near sourcing. There's also a tendency to kind of take back production to your home country. Is it big? No, not yet enough, but we also have to keep in mind that if you want to source things in a different country, it's quite a long process. You might have contracts with your supplier in China, you might have to find a new supplier, let's say in Moldova, or you might have to build a new production facility in Latvia. So, yeah, do we observe deglobalization? No, I do not think we do. We observe a different type of globalization where the decision makers, being in particular the businesses, think differently about the risks. That now we know what are the geopolitical risks. We see how consumers start caring about production conditions and so forth. Empirical evidence, I have covered. Economic growth, of course, there will be, again, countries that will benefit, most likely countries closer to where we are today, and there will be countries that will lose a bit in Asia. But overall, again, it will lead to overall increase in welfare. So a few words. I'm a regular visitor for 20 years to Moldova, but I cannot pretend to know very much about the economy as such, but I would say Moldova has a kind of big asset here in terms of being located close to the European Union and about to start kind of the real, and I would say hard work, preparing for EU. Two very, very good signs in terms of being attractive given the new framework that we observe in terms of risks. And this is what we saw very much in Latvia, that prior to 2004, 1st of May, when Latvia and other Baltic countries joined the European Union, essentially when the EU became an issue and the countries, all three Baltic, for EU accession, then the Baltic countries became much, much more interesting from the perspective of the foreign investors. That now we see there are changes, it's improving, and Swedish companies started really to think about maybe we do something in the Baltic countries rather than in China. Some even prior to EU moved production to have the benefit, or I have the benefit meeting Swedish business people. To them, there were two things that were extremely important: the geographical proximity and the shared values. And that could be the, call it, values, kind of our internal values, but it could also be the values that we see in terms of legal system and everything kind of at a higher institutional level. So no deglobalization, but a very different globalization is my guess in the years to come. And coming from small countries, we cannot really affect the processes, but I think we can benefit from them. So I think that's my presentation. Thank you very much, and feel free to approach me in coffee break.
Dear Professor, thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you for coming to Moldova, and we are grateful, very grateful to you for joining to our conference. Thank you very much. And as we discussed before the conference, there is many opportunities for collaboration between our institute, between Academy of Economic Studies of Moldova and your country with Baltic countries. And I think in the near future, we will take concrete steps in this regard. Thank you very much. In our plenary session, we have reports related to demographic aspects. As you are aware, the Republic of Moldova, like other countries in the region, is experiencing unprecedented demographic changes. In this regard, it is very interesting to learn from the experience of Baltic countries, and I would like to give the floor to Kata Fredheim, Associate Professor from the Stockholm School of Economics in Riga, Latvia. The title of the report is Migration and Demographic Change, Baltic Experiences. The floor is yours, dear Professor.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see all of you here on a sunny day like this. And thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to join you, Professor Gagas and Professor Stratton. Today, we spent the last 36 hours in Moldova now. And a lot of the things I've been hearing resonates with our experiences in the Baltics. So today I would like to talk about a project that we conducted over the last 4 years on return migration in the Baltics, but I will also speak about different aspects of migration. And I, like Professor Parzov, I very much look forward to engaging with you in the coffee break. I've seen the amazing migration program, and I'm very excited and a bit sad to miss some of it. So the past 30-something years in the Baltics look like this. And although I'm not from the Baltics, I have a very similar experience in terms of migration. I'm a migrant myself from Hungary. So some of the things that I talk about are not just a professional interest, but also personal. So in the 90s, what we witnessed is migration that was related mostly to the Soviet Union. People were returning, moving between borders and figuring out where their identity, where their life will be in this new sort of configuration. And then later on came the migration of high-skilled migrants back and forth. Before Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania joined the EU, it was usually high-skilled migrants who sought opportunities abroad. Everything changed in 2004. As the borders opened up, it was no longer the privilege and an opportunity for high-skilled migrants to move between borders and seek better opportunities, but of everyone. And very much coinciding with that was the economic crisis of 2007 and 2008. And the Baltic countries were hit really badly. The economy just went down, the real estate market collapsed, and people were without basic food items, for instance, or security. So what we witnessed is a huge flow of people out of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, people who still haven't returned. And these were not just high-skilled migrants, but students, laborers, young and old alike. We are still facing high levels of, and actually that picture with the fence is not, it reminds me of budget airlines were appearing at the same time in a lot of these airports in Poland, in Hungary. That's the fans you see at every Ryanair airport and most of the Wizz Air airports. So I spent many days and hours standing at queues like that as a student, for instance. And I think that is a generational experience for many. So what we have now is that migration is still happening. Low and high skilled workers are leaving for better opportunities. Students are seeking new opportunities. And one other thing that's happening, that people who have left and haven't returned, they are establishing families abroad. And so we are seeing the next generations of Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians being born abroad and seeking opportunities there. So these are just some of the things I would like to unpack as part of the report we prepared. Latvia has exhibited the fastest depopulation rate in the world, according to the UN, in the 2000s. So that was minus 18% of the population that was lost. Maybe this is resonating with the Moldovan experience as well. So that means it's a small country. It's a very small country, more than 300,000 people left. So we had high level of migration for many decades and a steadily declining population. And if you just look at some of the statistics, I will not speak much about it, but you will see that you have a high number of people leaving and there's not so many people coming to the country. And this has not been happening for a year or two, it's been decades. What about Estonia? Because if I speak about the Baltics, I should mention the other two countries, even though we are based in Latvia. Very similar. Estonia, however, is different because they have had more success in recruiting people from abroad. So they actually registered positive net migration in recent years. And Lithuania also lost a lot of people, much like Latvia, struggling with recruiting return migrants and migrants from abroad. So I break this down to four things really that I want to talk about today: immigration, return migration, emigration, and aging population and birth rates. Mostly I will talk about return migration. So when I speak about emigration, what we are noticing is, of course, labor migration. Salaries in the Baltics are still lower, so people are seeking opportunities abroad. Educational migration. A lot of the students are seeking opportunities abroad, especially after their primary higher education degree. So they go for masters abroad or PhDs, and then they settle into the labor markets abroad and do not return. One interesting finding from our project is actually youth migration. So we asked hundreds and thousands of youngsters aged 16 and 18 before they finish high school. What is the plan? What do you want to be when you grow up, and where do you want to be? And over 60% of them wanted to live abroad at one point, not necessarily straight after high school. And the main reason, which surprised us, was not that they want to earn more money or have a better job. It was to get experiences and be part of the global world, have experience with different cultures. So I think that's very much a part of lifestyle migration we are noticing. We are also seeing circular migration coming back and forth, and that's not just seasonal workers and strawberry pickers, but also doctors in Estonia have often jobs in Helsinki. They have two jobs and they come back and forth between the two countries. That's very much part of the Baltic DNA by now. So this leads to brain drain. I will not talk about this. And one way to look at brain drain is to look at brain gain. How can we get these people back? And how can we get access to the things they learned, and how can the societies benefit from that? So this has been huge in popular discourse, or the media, or the politicians. A lot of the projects were around, okay, so we must recruit these lost citizens. The numbers of return migrants remain low. Estonia stands out as the most successful one. So very quickly about the project, so you know where my data comes from. So we did 4 annual surveys, 11 rounds of surveys in total, 10,000 participants and 180 semi-structured interviews, which were at least an hour long. So it's masses of data that wouldn't fit in this room. We did Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and we focused on return migrants, entrepreneurs, and managers. And I think this is what resonated with us a lot. This is what we heard again and again from businesses, from people, from policymakers. When return migrants return, the skills, experiences, and networks they bring back constitute net human capital gains. And it's so important, not just for having the number of people in the country, not just for paying their taxes, but for innovation, for social security, and actually for happiness. So if you didn't know where the Baltics are, there's a map. Yeah, I'm a little bit late in time. So I thought I'd talk about what is it that we found out actually. People didn't return to these countries because of the money, and they didn't return because of the jobs, although there were some cases who had amazing job opportunities. The reasons for return were much simpler. They returned because they missed nature, and they lived very busy lives in London and in the Netherlands, and they haven't seen they've seen many tulips, but not so many trees. There's a lot of trees in the Baltics. They didn't want to live in a rat race. They had families, so that was a very important life stage. They didn't want to work 24/7, so they returned to the Baltics where they earn less, but they can purchase more and they have a better lifestyle. They returned for their families. A lot of the people wanted their children to grow up speaking the language that they spoke, wanted to be close to their parents and have the support of their parents in order to, I don't know, manage work and life and family. Seems impossible sometimes. But so reunification of families and communities was one of the most important things. And these seem idealistic, but this is what people who returned said. And lastly, and I don't really know how to put a hand on it, it's culture. That's a Latvian meeting. Latvia is famous for the meetings because you definitely need it starting October to May. But it's about the culture, it's about the heritage, and they really wanted not just themselves, but the children to reconnect with that. There was one difference between Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. Estonia very successfully embraced itself as a cool IT nation where everything is moving and every corner you find the startups. And that's even for those who didn't read the Estonian news, people knew about it from the BBC or whatever. And so they wanted to return to be part of that great country building and revolution. So that was a different kind of opportunistic patriotism we saw. But what we learned is that policies, if we really want to attract these return migrants, should shift attention to attracting people after they had experience, some work experience or education. So give them the opportunity to experience what it is like to work abroad and bring the networks, the capital, and of course the knowledge back. And one thing that a lot of people struggle with, if you've been out of a country for 10 years, it's your country and you think you know it, but you know it 10 years ago. And so much has changed. You need to re-register your driving license. You need to figure out how to get a job and how to pay your rent and electricity and all these things, institutionalize your children, finding schools. And there's currently no support available. So when people struggle, that's when they leave again. So if it was easier for people to find a way to quickly integrate to society, they would be more likely to stay. I will not speak about this because I would not want to speak too long, but again, one thing that I think is very important is immigration. Apart from return migration, we are also wanting to see migrants from elsewhere. And the only reason net migration was positive in all countries is the Ukrainian crisis, because we welcomed a lot of refugees from Ukraine. So that's like one of the plus sizes, and they're integrating really well in the labor market. The labor markets remain thirsty, and there is a need for skilled workers, but there is very much a feeling that we want a certain kind of person, a certain kind of worker. So Ukrainians are managing because they are culturally similar. They speak the same language. They speak Russian. And so it's almost seamless. But when we look at the experiences of Iraqis, etc., these are not welcoming societies for people with a different religion, a different background. Also India, Bangladesh, recruiting IT professionals remains a real challenge. Probably finish on something positive. And that migration is positive at the moment. And one good thing is that we are integrating the people who come, but I think there's much to be learned about how to recruit the people, whether they originate from these countries or not. So I very much look forward to sharing ideas and maybe research with some of you later on that. And do keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Kata, for the presentation. There are similar problems in the Republic of Moldova. And I think we have to try to identify the opportunities for reintegration of our citizens and to improve the conditions for their reintegration in our society. The next presentation is prepared by me and my colleague Valeriu Prohnitsky, PhD in economics. It is in interdisciplinary study in the nature. We use national transfer accounts for study to explore intergenerational redistribution in an aging society. First, about socioeconomic and demographic background of Moldova. On this slide, you can see some indicators that demonstrate Moldova's status as an emerging upper middle income country with low income, a low employment rate, a high poverty rate. Population number is in decline, driven by a high level of out-migration, a low level of fertility, and a high level of mortality. At the beginning of 2023, the resident population decreased to 2.5 million. In the coming decades, demographic decline and demographic aging will continue at a fast pace. By 2030, the age-sex pyramid will acquire an hourglass shape due to immigration of young people. About about 50% of the population will be age 50 and older, and a quarter in age 65 and older. These changes will have far-reaching social, economic, and political implications, and will have an impact on the profile of intergenerational redistribution, which refers to the transfer resources or wealth from one generation to another. One way to achieve intergenerational redistribution is through government policies and programs that aim to redistribute resources from a younger to older generations. This can be done through social security programs that provide income support for retirees, or through programs that provide medical care for the elderly. Another approach to intergenerational redistribution is through private transfers of wealth from parents to their children or grandchildren. This can take the form of inheritance, gifts, or financial support. The national transfer accounts is a methodological transfers between different age groups, provides a comprehensive picture of economic flows within a society through labor, income, consumption, savings, and transfers. The national transfer accounts is developed normally for a national population in a given calendar year. In our study, we use national transfer accounts calculated for Moldova from 2019 to 2020. The main national transfer accounts relies on the economic life cycle concept, which reflects patterns of consumption and earnings across the line. In this slide, you can see this concept in the x-axis show population age, the y-axis population's consumption and income in monetary terms. Age is one of the main determinants of individuals' economic behavior. People experience three economically different phases in their life course. Working age individuals are able to finance their own consumption by producing more than they consume, while at the youngest and oldest ages, individuals' consumption exceeds their labor income. In this way, it is created deficit for youngest and oldest generation, and you can see surplus that is generated by working age population. The gap between consumption and labor income life cycle deficit can be financed by private transfers, for example, transfers from parents to children, public transfers through publicly financed pensions and education, asset-based reallocations resulting from participation on capital and financial markets. These transfers are called intergenerational because they capture flows between different generations, between young working age and older people. The results for Moldova show that in Moldova, life cycle deficit is very high. The period when labor income of the population exceeds consumption is very short. I try to... No, it is not. The period when labor income of the population exceeds consumption is very short. The size of economic life cycle deficit that needs to be covered by public and private transfers is tens of times larger than the surplus. The aggregate value in the you can see the graph on the right reflect the population structure. An increase on the proportion of older people will increase the value of life cycle deficit and the funds needed to cover it. In 2021, the value of life cycle deficit was 85.2 billion, being higher than in 2019. In relation to GDP, the value of life cycle deficit is about 1/3, as you can see in this graph, that in 2021, life cycle deficit increased to 35.2% in relation to the GDP. The surplus for Republic of Moldova is very low, about 4.5 billion in 2019-2020 compared to the volume of life cycle deficit. This indicates a high degree of dependence of population on government and intergenerational transfers. The life cycle deficit value reflects age patterns of economic activity, employment, levels of consumption, and labor income, as well as population structures. The value of life cycle deficit for people age 65 and older is about 1/3 of the total value of life cycle deficit. You can see in this table. The life cycle deficit for older people is 26.3 billions. For young people, it is more than half, 43.6 billions. Private transfers play an important role for covering life cycle deficit, especially for the young generation. It's 26.2 billion for young generation, and public transfers is very important for the older generation, for the elderly. Flows transfers pensions cover about half of the older people consumption. A part of expenses is covered by labor income. In 2019, it was 17%. In 2021, only 12.2%. Private transfers for older people in 2019 made 10%. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing up to 14.3%. The share of government transfer also increased from 46.6 in 2019 up to 52.5 in 2020. Private transfers are mainly aimed at covering the consumption deficit of the young population. You can see the graph on the right, private transfer. The blue line show that that private transfer is the younger people is main recipients of private transfers, while public transfers are aimed at covering the deficit of the elderly. In the left graph, you see only this blue line that is very high for people in older ages. In this slide, you can see the profile of the inter-household transfers, which present the remittance from international migrants, transfers between households, which play a significant role in life cycle deficit, covering about 30% of global life cycle deficit. The recipients of migrants' remittances is the population age 18 years and older, according to the methodology of national transfer accounts. The head of the household is the recipient. Children and youth on age 0-26 years old are the main recipients of transfers within a household, while older people are also donors of such transfers. Only the oldest in 80 plus become the recipients. It is a green line. On the left, you can see inter-household transfers and intra-household transfers, the value share capita, and in the right graph, there is aggregate value of that is determined by population structure, and you can see that working age population and older population, there is donors for private transfers for a young generation. And in conclusions, the national transfer account, the case of Moldova, show that older people play an important role in intergenerational distribution. The public transfers flowing through the government have a high share of elderly support. In the coming decades, systems of intergenerational transfer will experience considerable stress due to a rapid increase in the proportion of older people in the total population. Intergenerational redistribution in an aging society requires careful consideration of various factors, including the social, economic, and fiscal implications. Thank you very much for your attention. And now we have last but not least the report Socio-Demographic Determinants of Mortality in the Republic of Moldova that will be presented by Associate Professor Olga Penina from the State University of Medicine and Pharmacy from Moldova. She successfully defended her habilitated doctoral dissertation yesterday. I was an official opponent. Congratulations, dear Olga, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this meeting, to this conference. I'm always happy to come back to the Center of Demographic Studies, where I worked for many years. So my topic is called Socio-Demographic Determinants of Mortality in the Republic of Moldova. And here we can see the trends in life expectancy. The trends in life expectancy at birth in a few countries, Moldova, Romania, Ukraine, Russia, and Poland, since the late 90s. Yes, for Moldova, we see, and like for other former Soviet Union countries, the trends in life expectancy were not linear at all. In these former Soviet Union countries, we can see starting from the mid-60s, the long-term deterioration of the health of the population. Then in the late 80s and in the 90s, we can see some very wide fluctuations in the level of mortality due to the anti-alcohol campaign launched by Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985, and then the collapse of the USSR and a very deep social and economic crisis. Yes, what is more important, after the end of this socio-economic crisis, yes, we cannot see some improvement, yes, in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, yes, and only starting from 2005 in Russia, like in Ukraine, in Moldova for males, only starting from 2010, we can see some improvements, yes, but these improvements we can see after a very long-term deterioration, especially for males, so that right now in 2010, yes, before the pre-COVID era, the level of life expectancy at birth for males is just 1 year more than it was more than 5 decades ago in the mid-60s. So in fact, the same situation during this communist period we can see for Poland, yes, and for Romania, but after the collapse of the communist regime, yes, in Poland, we can see a very stable improvement. The same we can see and for the Baltic countries, especially for Estonia. In Romania, the improvement started somewhat later, but they are very stable. So the aim of this research, we wanted to examine the socio-demographic determinants like place of residence, marital status, and the educational level, and also some regional differences in mortality in our country. And we will focus only on the period of independence due to the availability of data. So our hypothesis is that a high level of mortality in Moldova, yes, coexists with significant differences in mortality by cause of death between different social subgroups of the population and between different districts. A few words about the data. We used the de-identified database of medical death certificates provided by the National Agency for Public Health, and also the de-identified database of statistical form number 3, DES, and we could merge the two data sets by some variables, and it which led us to analyze mortality by cause of death, by sex, by age, by locality, by marital status, and the level of education. Due to the availability of the population data, when we analyze mortality by marital status or the level of education, we can focus only on the periods around the last two censuses conducted in 2004 and 2014. When we look at mortality differences by place of residence, urban, rural, again, the availability of population data let us focus on more periods, and the same for the district level. So here is the population pyramids. You can see in 2004 and 2000, according to the marital status. Yes, we see that most people, more than 70%, are married population. In 2004, we had a big share of, in fact, of widowed population. It's somewhat less in 2014, and also never married population at the age of 30 and over. So this is for the older, for the adult population, especially for in males, the share of never married population somewhat increased between two censuses. And below you can see the population structure for of the Moldovan population according to two censuses. According to the level of education, yes, more than 70%, even 75% have the secondary education. Yes, in 2004, we see a big share of the population at older ages with primary and lower education, because these people were born during the World War II, yes, and they didn't have the opportunity to get the secondary education. And also population, the share of the population with higher education is increasing between two censuses, especially for females. As for the population by place of residence, yes, Moldova is still the rural population is predominant according to different censuses. And it's important also to say that we use the adjusted population by district level. These data were adjusted by the National Bureau of Statistics, especially for the municipality of Chisinau, where according to the last census, the coverage of the population was less than 60%. So it's important to say that the data for population are adjusted and verified, either officially or by our efforts. Also, if we want to, a few words about the quality of data, when we want to analyze mortality for post-Soviet countries like Moldova, yes, for the 90s, it's a challenge, because at this period we had a very important increase in senility and ill-defined causes of death. That is why before analyzing mortality by cause of death, it's necessary to resolve this problem. Yes, and in our study, attributed, in fact, ill-defined causes of death to cardiovascular disorders. The same approach was used, for example, for Ukraine. And we did it, and at the national level, which in fact changes the trends in mortality for heart diseases and makes them more coherent with overall trend. And the same we did at the level of by place of residence. Okay, so here we see life expectancy at birth by place of residence, urban, rural, by sex for 5 different periods. We see the urban-rural difference. It means that in urban areas, people live longer than in rural area on average the 2.5 years, but this difference, so it was maximum in the early 90s, but this difference was minimum, but still statistically significant around 2004 census, in 2003, 2005, and it was minimum in 2020 when the COVID-19 was. This decline in the difference was due to an increase in mortality among urban population, but not rural. So it means this period between early 90s and 2003, 2005, this is the economic crisis. So it means that the urban population, especially males, they reacted more to these social and economic perturbations compared to the rural population. And the same, the situation was during the pandemic crisis. Yes, it was urban population who experienced a deeper deterioration of health, a bigger increase in mortality, but not a rural population. And if we look at mortality differences by age for different periods, yes, we can see that the biggest differences, in fact, are not among all the population, but among adult population and even children. Yes, but among all the population, these differences in mortality between urban and rural populations, they are almost close to zero. And here, yes, we look at absolute and relative differences in mortality between rural and urban populations in the early 90s and in 2017, 2019, before COVID-19 pandemic. So it's recommended to analyze disparities in mortality using absolute and relative differences like rate difference and rate ratio. So we can see that differences between urban and rural male populations increased declined for neoplasms and for circulatory diseases. Yes, but why it happened? Because during this period of independence, in fact, mortality from neoplasms, for example, increased and in urban and in rural populations. But in rural populations, it increased much faster than in urban populations. And as a result, this difference between rural and urban areas for neoplasm declined. The same for circulatory disease. Declined between 91-93 and 2017-2019, but it was due to the fact that mortality from circulatory diseases declined in rural areas more rapidly, in fact, than in urban areas, though it declined in both areas. But for respiratory and external causes of death, these inequalities in mortality between male and urban males, they increased. Why? Because the situation for these two causes of death improved for urban males, but not for rural males over this period of independence, over the analyzed period. So here we look at life expectancies at age 30 and 60s. By marital status, we have 4 categories: never married, married, divorced, and widowed. And life expectancy at age 30 and at age 60, and for 2 periods around 2004 census and around 2014 census. And we can see that married males and married females, they have the highest life expectancy, but never married females, yes, and divorced males, they had the lowest values of life expectancy at age 30 or at age 60. So, for example, in 2013-14, yes, married females and married males, they lived on average 13 years longer than never married females or divorced males. What is more important that after 2005, we see some increase in life expectancy at the national level, but this improvement was not equal by marital categories. In fact, it were married males and married females. They had the highest improvement in life expectancy at 30 and 60 over this period. On the other hand, for example, divorced females, they did not gain in life expectancy at age 30, they even lost 2 years. And again, when we look at the differences by marital status and by age, here we use married population as a reference group, we see that the biggest differences between married and unmarried population occur among young adults. For example, never married females at age 30-39, they had more than the risk of death from all causes was 6 times more than married females at the same age group. And if we look at relative differences or at ratio by marital status and by main causes of death in 2003, 2005, and 2013, 2014, we can see, in fact, that the highest relative differences between married and unmarried categories were for infectious diseases in males and females, for external causes of death for males and for females, and for respiratory diseases. Yes, for example, divorced males, yes, divorced males in 2013, 2014, the risk of dying from infectious disease was more than 8 times compared to married male. And here we see life expectancy again at age 30 and age 60 by the level of education. We have 3 groups, primary or lower, secondary and higher. And we see that over 2 periods, for males and for females, the lowest life expectancy was among subgroups of the population with primary or lower, and the highest life expectancy was among people with higher education. And this difference was very huge. Yes, and for males and for females, people with higher education, they expect to live on average 10 years more than people with primary or lower education. But over this period between 2 censuses, we can see the improvements in life expectancy and for people with higher education, yes, and in fact, and for people with primary and lower education. So people with secondary education, there were some between them. And again, these inequalities in health by education, they are the biggest for young adults, not for older adults. And if we look at inequalities by different causes of death, we see again that the most striking relative differences in mortality and for males and for females were observed for infectious diseases, for respiratory diseases, for external causes of death. For other causes, except for neoplasm, they were also statistically significant, but less pronounced. And it's interesting to note that the level of education does not have an influence on the risk of dying from cancer. And here we see life expectancy at birth at age 25 and at age 65 by districts. We found a gradient in mortality between north of the country, especially for females. It's yellow, yes, it's where life expectancy is relatively high. The same like in the municipality of Chisinau, it's yellow, and the center of the central regions is the dark blue and blue, where life expectancy is relatively low. So this differentiation between north and center, so-called north-central gradient, is especially pronounced for life expectancy at age 25. Yes, less marked, especially for males at older ages, but still important for females at older ages. So we called these, we have 11 regions, the most affected regions. Yes, we called it the belt, or the red belt, it is called, also it's blue. The red belt have a high mortality that stretches from Shaldanezh to Kantemir regions. And we also try to produce the spatial analysis of mortality. It means we tried to detect the clusters or hot and cold spots of high or low mortality. So we used so-called spatial autocorrelation analysis, global and local. So global autocorrelation analysis, or Moran's index, you can see some numbers. It just indicates that in data we have the clusters. Yeah. It means we have some regions which have similar level of mortality. And this global Moran's index was statistically significant for all causes of death. It was the highest for digestive disorders, especially for females, for circulatory disorders, and for external causes of death, but only in males. And we can see hot spots in the center for these causes. What does it mean, hot spots? It means these are the districts where mortality is high, and these districts are surrounded by other districts where mortality is also high. And especially these hot spots are very impressive for digestive disorders, especially for females. And we can see cold spots. It means districts with low mortality surrounded by districts also with low mortality in the north of the center. Yes, for different causes, but not for external causes of death in males. Okay. And also we try to look at mortality differences, regional mortality differences during the period of independence. We made some the hierarchical analysis of life expectancies by age, and in the early 90s and in 2012-2016, we have three clusters of the population. So in the early 90s, the cluster with the best performing cluster, that is cluster with the highest life expectancy, was represented mainly by northern districts and the municipality of Chisinau. Now this cluster reduced to just to three administrative units. This is the municipality of Chisinau and two very remote districts in the north. This is Yegenets and Brichane. On the other hand, the worst performing cluster, that is cluster where life expectancy is the worst, increased from 4 districts in the early 90s up to 11 districts. Yes, at present, which form this red belt of high mortality. And if we look how life expectancy changed over the period of independence in these three clusters, we can see that in the leading cluster, yes, we observe the difference, the increase in life expectancy 3.6 years. And this increase was due to a decline in mortality from cardiovascular disorders at older ages, a decline in mortality from external causes of death among young adults, and a decline in mortality, in infant mortality. But when we see the lagging cluster, so the worst performing cluster, these 11 districts, we can see the difference in life expectancy just 1 year between 90s and right now, and we can see that here we observed a decline in infant mortality, mostly from respiratory disorders, but this decline in infant mortality was offset by an increase in adult mortality from neoplasms. And let me just say a few conclusions. So during the period of independence, this rural-urban gradient in all-cause mortality, in fact, stagnated for males and declined for females. And it's important that the socio-economic crisis of the 90s affected the urban population more than the rural population. After 2005, when we observe the increase in life expectancy at the national level, the situation is much better. Cardiovascular disorders and external causes of death. So marital status and the level of education had a very significant impact on mortality and causes of death. Divorced men, never married women, and the population with primary education or lower are the most disadvantaged subpopulations. And here the most pronounced relative differences in mortality are due to infectious diseases, respiratory disorders, and external causes of death. We observed the north-central gradient in mortality and in males and in females. And this red belt of high mortality included 11 districts, mostly located in the center. The gap in life expectancy between best performing after independence, now it's more than 6 years. And the leading cluster municipality of Chisinau, yes, and some northern districts, they benefited a lot from effective control of cardiovascular disorders, especially among older population, and external causes of death among adults. But in the lagging cluster, in fact, very moderate progress during the period of independence was among infants, but this progress was in fact offset by increased mortality from external causes and neoplasm among middle-aged males. So, and the global spatial autocorrelation was positive, statistically significant for all causes of death, and especially for diseases of the digestive and circulatory system in both sexes and external causes of death. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, dear Olga, for your presentation. You've raised crucial questions about public health, which are vital for human resource development and for economic growth. And with this report, our plenary session is closed. Thank you to all the presenters. Very important questions related to economic development, global order, the impact of external factors on economic growth, and demographic dynamics have been raised. Your findings hold significant value for the academic community and policymakers, whom we will inform through the publication of your reports. Thank you all again for your presentation and participation in the conference. I hope you will have very interesting discussions during coffee break and within the session. Now I announce a coffee break until 1:30 p.m. Following that, the thematic session will take place probably you know the room where we will take place this thematic session in the program is indicated. We invited to coffee, which you can serve in on the third floor in 2020 room. When you go down, turn the left and go once again, and I would like you to have interesting discussions within these sessions.
Da. Măta într-acela, deci, și ăsta și pe aparatul de sus. Ia ca slavă Domnului. Așa o să te conectezi, domnule?
Nu știu, lor să trebuiască, nu se trebuie. Честно.
La ăștia